My presentation is based on a research project I was involved in titled The Contribution of Gender Justice to Successful Climate Politics. So this one was focusing on Germany and industrialized countries. Also the results, of course, are focusing on that area. Starting point of the research project was a literature review on gender and climate change in industrialized countries in order to provide knowledge for the following work packages in the research project and, of course, for climate policies. First slide, please. I can't see the slides. Is it already there? So what do we know about gendered carbon footprints? I will start with a short presentation of, next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, thanks. I will start with a short presentation of two different ways to calculate these footprints. The first one was already published in 2009, came from Sweden and was later applied to data from Germany, Norway and Greece. Rita Reti and Annika Kalsen-Kaniyama based their calculation on the expenditures of female and male single-person household and combined these data with data from energy, about energy intensity of the products which were bought. In general, they found that food, housing and transportation contribute about 75% to the household emissions, overall household emissions, with a tendency that emissions increase with increasing income. Differences between male and female households were highest in Greece, followed by Sweden, which I found astonishing. So in Sweden, for example, men's carbon footprints were 22% higher than women's carbon footprints. In Germany and Norway, they were considerably lower, but still males' footprints were higher than women's. In all countries, men's emissions are higher in the fields of transport, restaurant, food, alcohol and tobacco consumption, while women emit more due to health expenditures, food, hygiene and household products. What we can see by this methodology of calculation is that energy consumption and carbon emissions are closely linked to gendered identity. So the doing gender is important here. The second example for calculation was done by Angela Druckmann and her colleagues in UK, and they based their calculation on time spent for household tasks and who does them. So they calculated average emissions per hour for particular tasks in the household, like cooking, cleaning, washing, caring for elderly and children, and linked them to data from time use studies. The result, you might imagine, women have a far higher carbon footprint than men. Not really surprising, given that women are still doing the largest part of this work. This means this way of calculation leads to completely different results in terms of emission levels. In this example, we find a close link to gender roles and responsibilities. And we have, of course, to ask the question why emissions resulting from care work for others are attributed to those who are doing the work and not to those who are receiving the care. So also none of these methods to calculate gendered carbon footprint is sufficient. They provide an idea about the problems in the way of calculation and also in the need for discussions about the underlying causes for differentiated carbon footprints. Looking at particular sectors of climate policy might shed a light to the latter question. I very briefly want to introduce two examples you might be familiar with. So one is mobility and the other nutrition. Next slide, please. So most data, waiting for the slide. Thanks. Most data are available about transportation or mobility. I use these both terms no, what's the right word? You need, so as if it were the same. It's not the same, I know. The significantly higher carbon footprint of men in the first calculation example I presented mainly result from their mobility patterns. They drive larger cars, use them more frequently and for longer distances compared to women. While women have more complex mobility chains, in particular employed mothers. So change means they go from home to bring the children to the kindergarten, go to work, go shopping, pick up their children, bring them to the music school, and so on and so on. So that's one of the reasons for this mobility change. And they drive shorter distances, and again, in particular, if they have to care for children. Women use more often public transport and walk for short distances, but go less often by bicycle, maybe due to security reasons. Reasons for the gender differences can be found in income gaps, in the lower radius of mobility because of these, I explained it already, gendered responsibilities, which means women's workplaces usually are closer to the area where they live than men's. Or let's say mothers' workplaces are closer to each other. Gender differentiated environmental awareness may play an additional role, as well as gender identity. For example, presenting masculinity, sexual and economic virility via the size, speed, and sound is important. Of the car is an example I think everybody might know. And yeah, can I have the next slide? So I want to go to the next example and have a short look at nutrition. So in particular, the consumption of meat and dairy products is contributing more or less the same amount to the per capita greenhouse gas emissions than transport. It's about 16%. In general, men eat twice as much meat and meat products than women overall in the world. So there are no country where it's different. And they eat it more often. So half of them eat it daily, more or less daily, or almost daily, while less than 1/4 of the women do so. In Germany, for example, 6% of the population are vegans or vegetarians, of which 30% are male and 70% female. So this share of female and male vegetarians and vegans is quite similar everywhere, but the share of the population is different. That's why I brought this example from Germany with the 6% of the population. There is a lot of research pointing to the fact that meat consumption, in particular red meat, so beef, for example, is a symbol for masculinity, for strength, for potency, and for performance. While vegetable and fruits, as well as white meat, which is, for example, chicken, are linked to health and female body images, thus to femininity. So the doing gender via nutrition seems to be an integral part for the male and female identity construction. This creates new challenges for the motivation for a diet that contributes less to climate change than the current one. Data show that if men would change their typical diet or food habits to the ones of women, 12% of the total greenhouse gas emissions, so the total, it's important, greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced. This demonstrates quite clearly that it's not enough to address women's issues in climate change mitigation. There's an urgent need to transform masculinity. If you want to know more about it, I suggest to read the publications from Martin Hultman and his colleagues from Sweden, who are focusing their research since many, many years on masculinity and climate change. So let me come to the end and to the last slide. A problem we always face when looking at gendered carbon footprints and more general at gender and climate change is the availability of data. Most data are disaggregated by sex, so it's about women and men, male or female, interdependencies and linkages to other social categories like income, education, cultural, migration background, age, etc. are seldom provided. provided. So these data are available, but they are not connected to the gender disaggregated data. Intersectional approaches and respective provision of data are even more rare, as well as looking at gender beyond women and men, thus data about gay and lesbian, trans, intersectional persons, and so on, and their carbon footprints. That means we face a huge data and knowledge gap when looking at the gendered carbon footprint. This is important to have in mind, because when arguing with sex disaggregated data, this might even reinforce traditional gender roles instead of contributing to gender justice in a transformative way. To end with a more optimistic outlook, I want to point to an increasing number of studies that connect per capita emission levels with levels of gender equality in all parts of the world. So in the north and in the south, in the east and in the west, and both at country level and at city level, it was found that higher levels of gender equality result in, or let's say it's a little bit more cautious, are linked to lower levels of carbon emissions. That means investing in gender equality means to invest in climate change mitigation. So that's how it should work. Yeah, so far for now. Thanks for your attention, and I hope I'm in the time.
Thank you, Ulrike. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me for this feminist climate conference and to comment after my colleague Ulrike. I would like to start my speech or comments with what the author Tolstoy once said in his novel Anna Karenina. He said, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. That means the gender differentiated role of carbon footprints, it's may different from country to country, may different from developed country and from developing country, but it's still the same. The big difference is the lack of data. Where there is in some countries, we have the data and we have scientific research that make it clear and an evidence this gendered role of carbon footprint, and in other countries like Tunisia or in the Middle East, we have only observations. Men and women on each country, community and society contribute differently to the causes of climate change while analyzing their carbon footprint. As men as a group and more involved with work contributes to greenhouse gas emission, as they are work in industries and they are driving big cars, and as Ulrike already said, eating more meat than women. So we can see that men are contributing more to greenhouse gas emission more than women. A recent study published in Scientific Ecological Economics journal last October shows that carbon footprint of everyday activity in Austria register a gendered gap because a traditional gendered division of labor is clearly visible, as men spend double the time of with commitment activity than as women. Women spend double of the time with commitment activity than men, with the workload of house caregiving, house activities, and this gives more time mobility for men to do an extra entertainment activity, which consume much more greenhouse emission than women. They are doing this house activity of cooking, cleaning, and then we add this carbon footprint to the women consumption of greenhouse gas emissions. Also, for example, in Tunisia, we have in a recent publication of its third communication about climate change. So it's for the first time they are talking about gender in their reports. So they are writing analysis of gender mainstreaming and national adaptation policies, identified barriers to gender mainstreaming in the field of climate change. as existing sectoral climate change vulnerability studies in Tunisia are all considered to be gender neutral. So the lack of gender aggregated data and differentiated data in all climate sectors in Tunisia, so it is not helping the government to see the difference and where to include the gender in the mainstreaming in the national climate policies. That's why the gender differentiated data is very important when it comes to more including women in the decision making and to having the gender mainstreaming through national determined contributions and national climate policies. So the two main points that we may observe the gender differentiated data due to work load, to the differentiated labor roles, to, for example, in Tunisia and agriculture, we have more women working in the agriculture sector than men. However, in the national agriculture policy dealing with the climate change, they are not referent to women in these policies. That's why we need much more data analysis from gender perspective to include much more women in decision making. That we'll talk about it later.